And that's the way it is. Friday, March 6, 1981.
Well, that was the way it was, because more than on any other medium, the competing channels of information looked pretty much the same. For over a decade now, ever since specialty cable services came into being, I've been hoping in vain for news services with a more radical political bias. On the left, the Noam Chomsky, Mother Jones, NAACP, This Magazine, Ms. channel, and on the right, the Washington Spectator, New Criterion, National Review, Alberta Report, Fraser Institute channel. Now you may say, oh hey, CBC and CTV come pretty close to those descriptions. But the truth is the hardcore left will never get over its internal bickering to organize, and the far right, as we all know, is already operating the real levers of power. Whatever. In the meantime, the institution known as the news may be losing some of the authoritative veneer it once had. News anchors are the regular butt of spoofs in rock videos and movies.
This is more than Nixon ever sweated.
Our own State Department was rocked, not only by the revelation, but from the highly unusual persistence of the State Press Corps.
And numerous broadcasters have either subverted the format of the news comically.
For his part, Harris says he wants the striking workers to police themselves. I'm sorry, that should read, Harris wants the police themselves to start striking the workers.
Or appropriated it to deliver the good news.
Jack Van Impe presents a news program analyzing and evaluating world events.
He dialed 911 and saved his owner's life. That's God, who has put the instinct within these animals to do right and to love their offspring.
And some have even mutated it infomercially to sell suspect products, making it increasingly tough to tell the snake oil salesman from the real McCoy. But serious incursions into the official news domain are also occurring, at least on community-based TV, increasingly democratizing the news, which brings me to our first story tonight. Remember the broadcast of the infamous P4W tapes made by the Emergency Task Force as they removed inmates from their cells at Kingston's Prison for Women in April of '94. You can't get more institutional than the Canadian penal system. Everything a con does from the moment of the first lockdown to 1 second before the end of his sentence is governed by the rules and regulations of Corrections Services Canada. But it's from this sealed environment that a show has come which truly is outsider TV. Contact is made by prisoners for the prisoner community out of Cable 13, Kingston, Ontario's community access channel. It's as low budget as you'll ever see, but for those in the system and for those who run it, Contact has become the place to air their grievances and share their experiences. Take, for example, this episode of the show aired not long after the release of the infamous P4W tapes. With a mic taped to a telephone, Contact heard from the guards at Kingston's Prison for Women.
I want to talk about abuse, Rick. Nobody was in that segregation unit that suffered more abuse than the officers. The inmates were dishing it out.
Well, caller, thank you for that comment.
And took calls live on the air from the actual women who appeared in the video.
Yep.
What happened? Do you really want to know what happened, Rick?
I'd like to know.
We were mentally abused for those 4 days. Okay? We were mentally abused.
So
Guards were coming in and
Rick Atkinson was doing time at Frontenac Prison when he hosted Contact. Today, he's in a halfway house, and even though he no longer hosts the show, he's still pursuing his dream of a national prison broadcast. Rick, welcome.
Hi, how you doing?
Okay. Now, there are some people whose view of prisons would be that even having a TV set in a con's cell is a luxury, but you want a national network. What gives?
Well, there's a lot of information that has to be taken from the prison out to the public so that the Canadian public is more cognizant of what's happening inside the prisons so that they can lobby their politicians and ask for the changes that would please them the best. What's good for the total Canadian society is good for everybody, convicts included.
There's a thing, you know, that people believe prisons is about separating the criminals from society and, of course, in extreme punishment circumstances, separating them from one another. But TV is all about connecting. It's a contradiction in terms of what prison is about.
The worst punishment the administration can initiate against an individual in prison is to put him in solitary confinement. In other words, segregate him from the rest of the population. Even the prison officials know that prolonged exposure to that segregation has detrimental effect on one's mentality. So there's a law within the prison system. You can't spend more than 30 days in the hole without being brought out for 1 day, and then you can go back for another 30 days. So what society is saying is to throw a person in solitary confinement for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years and then just bring him out and he'll be normal. It doesn't work that way.
When you say national network, of course I suddenly conjure up the idea of regional bureaus. Now supposing you had such a thing, you had correspondents in different prisons around the country, and there was one in Headingley. What would have happened there with the riot that happened in Manitoba
We would have got a
last
phone
week?
call 2, 3 weeks, maybe a few months prior to the tension that initiated the riot. We'd have then went in with the cameras, met with the ward, the head of security, the head of preventive security, the inmate committee, the inmates themselves, and discussed what the problem is. Now, through that exposure and dialogue, there could have been a solution to the problem that wouldn't have cost Canadians $40 million.
So you're saying on an ongoing basis we could be sensitized to the... Well, what would prevent, in fact, though, cons from using the TV as a stage, you know, to riot on? I mean, you see it in Tehran, you know, you see it in many hot spots around the world. What would...
A riot is never to the benefit of the guys that are inside. The riot is the spontaneous combustion of uncontrolled energy. And it often happens like that. One guy can initiate a riot. So bringing a camera inside would simulate a lot of that tension. And it wouldn't have happened.
Do you think there's a danger of having a show like this which would glorify cons who, you know, I don't know, sex offenders or people, murderers, what have you? Because TV does have a tendency to glorify demons, you know?
Well, yeah, that's if you sensationalize the story like main media usually does in order to grab the viewers. We didn't do that. We wanted to get the information out. So sometimes on Contact there would be a boring but informative show. That wouldn't happen in mainstream media. There is no boring shows. If you are, you flip the channel. For us, the people stayed because it was stuff pertinent to them. Guards watch, police watch, cons wives watch, and people involved in advocacy of prisons or tearing prisons down also watch.
How do you think the mainstream TV actually deals with prison issues?
They go for the most sensationalized story to get the viewers that they can get at the time the story's happening. An example, it's been 4 days, 5 days, a week now since that riot out west. It's not in the news anymore. Why? It would have been in our news still, because we'd have been still talking to wardens, still talking to psychologists, still talking to the wives of the people involved.
Mainstream media prides itself on its objectivity and its news coverage. A lot of people would say, well, why should we trust you? You know, you're a con, you're doing, what, 17 years plus, 27 years plus. You've got, you know, a history of all kinds of stuff behind you. It's sort of like asking, you know, the mob to run, produce a show called Marketplace, or the Bank of Montreal, even worse.
Arguments.
I mean, what are your skills? What are your skills that you bring to the journalism trade?
Well, I was a producer of crime. I now produce television, or was producing television in Kingston. There's great similarities to it. If you're a producer of television, you can produce crime, and vice versa.
All right, then. Well, what do you think of the future of this program?
I think if we were to, let's put it this way, $40 million or something's just been wasted, and I'm termed wasted in the violent outburst out west. CSC has a budget. They have a budget of $4 or $5 million per year for media coverage and to get positive PR out in the community. They allowed us to be trained in their institutions. There's like 15 guys trained on camera, trained on sound, 2 or 3 guys trained on hosting. They would save a lot of money just by funding the Contact show and allow it to happen.
Rick Atkinson, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.